She's the maid. Helps around the house. The words cut through the ballroom. Ethan Cross's voice carried perfectly across the marble floor, his practiced executive tone ensuring every investor, board member and journalist within 30 feet caught every syllable. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Not uncomfortable chuckles, but the genuine amusement of people who believed they were witnessing harmless corporate humor. Camera phones discreetly captured the moment. A reporter from Financial Weekly actually smiled as she jotted notes. Alicia Cross stood beside her husband, her fingers wrapped around the stem of her untouched champagne glass. She didn't flinch. She didn't blush. She simply lowered her eyes, but not in shame. In timing. The tech mogul who'd asked the innocent question, "And who is this lovely lady?" was still grinning, waiting for the punchline to resolve. But there wasn't going to be one. This was the punchline. "Alicia's wonderful at organization," Ethan continued, his arms sliding around her waist. "Keeps everything clean and tidy. Very thorough with details." His grip tightened, publicly affectionate, privately controlling. Alicia felt the familiar pressure of his fingers. The same fingers that had signed contract after contract, deal after deal, never bothering to read the fine print. Never bothering to ask who was actually authorizing the transfers that built his empire. But tonight she wasn't thinking about his ignorance. Tonight she was thinking about one document Ethan hadn't bothered to read. And one signature he assumed belonged to him. "How refreshing," the tech mogul said, though his smile had dimmed slightly. "A traditional arrangement." "Traditional." Ethan laughed, the sound sharp and confident. "I'd call it practical. Some people are built for boardrooms. Others are built for service." More laughter. Softer now but still there. Alicia raised her eyes, meeting the gaze of several women in the crowd. He saw recognition there. Not of her face but of her position. They knew this dance. They understood the careful balance of public silence and private endurance. What they didn't understand was that Alicia had stopped dancing years ago. She'd been building instead. Building files. Building evidence. Building legal structures that Ethan had signed without reading, trusting her to handle the boring paperwork, while he focused on climbing corporate ladders. Making her not just his wife, but the person who had been signing what he never read. "Well," the tech mogul said, clearly ready to move the conversation elsewhere, "I'm sure you both." "Actually," Alicia said softly, "I'll check on something." Ethan smiled like he'd won. "See? Natural instincts." But as Alicia excused herself, she wasn't heading to the kitchen. She was walking toward the mezzanine conference room where CEO Elliot Carver was conducting final reviews before tonight's major announcement. The announcement that would reshape everything. The announcement that required one final signature. As she climbed the marble staircase, Alicia allowed herself one small smile. The discreet device in her clutch had captured every word Ethan just spoke. And tonight wasn't the first time. "Actually," Alicia said softly, "I'll check on something." Ethan smiled like he'd won. Alicia walked away, straight toward the mezzanine conference room where the CEO was waiting on one final approval. Not Ethan's. Hers. Elliot Carver didn't ask why she was there. He just said, "Right on time." The mezzanine conference room was quiet. 3 manila folders aligned on the polished table. Elliot stood studying the city lights through the windows, his back to the door. "Mrs. Cross," he said without turning around. "Actually, it's Miss Thorne tonight." Alicia closed the door behind her. "My maiden name. The one I kept on every document that matters." Elliot turned, his expression unreadable. "Reverting already? That's premature." "Not reverting. Reclaiming." Alicia moved to the conference table. "The papers are ready for your signature." "Before we proceed," Elliot said, settling into his chair, "I need to understand something. This plan has been 2 years in the making. Are you certain you want to proceed tonight?" Alicia sat across from him, her posture straight but relaxed. "You heard what he called me downstairs." "I did. But public embarrassment and corporate destruction are different levels of response." For the first time that evening, Alicia's composure cracked slightly. "Elliot, you've seen the recordings. You've reviewed the financial documents. Tonight wasn't about embarrassment. It was about showing 200 industry leaders that Ethan Cross views women as property." Elliot opened the first folder, scanning pages he'd already memorized. "The holding entities are in place." His signatures are on the authorizations. He never read them. Alicia's voice carried no satisfaction, only fact. I would place the papers in front of him during dinner. He'd sign while talking about his day, his deals, his future. Never once asking what he was actually authorizing. And the Clearwater acquisition? He thinks it's his. It isn't. Elliot studied her carefully. This goes beyond financial maneuvering, Alicia. You're systematically dismantling a man's entire existence. No. Alicia leaned forward. I'm simply stopping him from using my legal identity to build his empire while treating me like hired help. The moment stretched between them. Elliot had known Alicia for 3 years, not as Ethan's wife, but as the silent partner behind every major transaction that had elevated Cross Industries. She'd reached out initially through corporate lawyers, identifying herself only as a beneficial owner requiring disclosure meetings. It had taken 6 months before Elliot realized that the brilliant strategic mind behind the legal structures was the same woman Ethan publicly dismissed at company events. There's something you should know, Elliot said finally. Robert Kellerman from the Financial Review has been asking questions about tonight's announcement. Someone tipped him off that there might be unexpected changes to the Clearwater deal. Alicia's expression didn't change, but her fingers stilled against the folder. Someone from your office? That's what concerns me. The only people who knew about tonight's plan were you, me, and my legal counsel, Calvin Rourke. Calvin assured me he hasn't spoken to any journalists. The implication hung in the air. Either Elliot's trusted counsel had leaked information, or someone else knew more about Alicia's strategy than they'd realized. How much does Kellerman know? Alicia asked. Enough to be here tonight with questions. Not enough to have published anything yet. Alicia processed this with methodical precision. If someone leaked our plans, they want to either stop tonight's announcement or amplify it publicly. The question is which? Elliot slid the second folder toward her. Because once I take that stage and introduce you as the chairwoman, there's no controlling the story. Alicia opened the folder, revealing photographs. Ethan at various corporate events over the past year, always with Alicia in the background. Never introduced. Never acknowledged beyond polite nods. In several photos his body language was unmistakably dismissive. A hand gesture cutting off her attempt to join a conversation. A step away when investors showed interest in speaking with her. Where did you get these? Calvin's been documenting Ethan's behavior at industry events. Photos from events, internal PR archives, and security stills the venue keeps on file. But as Alicia studied the images, something cold settled in her stomach. These weren't random event photos. Someone had been methodically collecting evidence of Ethan's dismissive treatment, capturing moments that painted a comprehensive picture of systematic disrespect. Elliot, she said slowly, exactly how long has Calvin been documenting my husband? Elliot's pause lasted 1 second too long. Since you first contacted our firm about the shell company structures. That was 3 years ago. I only shared our plan with you 6 months ago. The silence was deafening. Alicia closed the folder, her mind racing. If Calvin had been watching Ethan for 3 years, it meant he'd been building a case parallel to hers, with information she'd never shared. Elliot, she said, her voice carefully controlled, who exactly is Calvin working for? Before Elliot could answer, Alicia's phone buzzed. Unknown number. Beautiful speech tonight, Mrs. Cross. Too bad your husband won't be there to hear the ending. See her. Alicia went still. Because whoever it was, they didn't just know her name. They knew her timing. Alicia stared at the message again. Too bad your husband won't be there to hear the ending. DP. Elliot, she said without looking up, who else has access to tonight's presentation? Elliot moved to his laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard. The deck is password protected. Only you, me, and Calvin have the access codes. Check the file logs. Elliot's face went pale as data populated the screen. Someone opened the presentation 27 minutes ago. Downloaded the entire deck. Alicia felt something cold settle in her chest. Calvin. No. The user ID shows. Dorian Price. Event AV Director. The name meant nothing to Alicia, but Elliot was already pulling up personnel files. Price handles all the audiovisual coordination for tonight's event. Stage lighting, microphone systems, presentation displays. Someone paid him to leak it. Elliot nodded grimly. Which means whoever sent that text knows exactly what we plan to announce. They know about the ownership transfers, the acquisition details, everything. Alicia moved to the window, watching Ethan work the crowd below. His confidence was absolute, his gestures expansive. He had no idea what was coming, unless someone had warned him. Elliot, if they sabotage the presentation, if they cut the audio or change the slides, then we have nothing. The whole plan collapses. Alicia turned back to the conference table, her mind racing through options that had narrowed to a single path forward. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a slim folder containing 3 documents. We don't need the presentation, she said, sliding the folder toward Elliot. We need 1 slide, 1 document, and 1 audio clip. Elliot opened the folder. The first page was a deed of ownership, stamped and notarized. The second was a bank authorization form bearing Ethan's signature. The third was a transcript of a recorded conversation. This is enough? Elliot asked. It's everything. Alicia's voice was steady, final. If they can sabotage a presentation deck, they can't sabotage legal documents filed with the state. If they cut the microphone, I don't need the microphone. I own the room. Elliot studied the ownership deed, recognizing the venue address. You bought the building? Last month. Through one of the holding companies Ethan never bothered to research. Alicia collected her phone, her purse, her resolve. The lease agreement his company signed for tonight's event? It has a morality clause. Any behavior deemed detrimental to the property's reputation gives me grounds for immediate termination of the event. You're going to shut down the gala? No. Alicia moved toward the door, her decision crystallizing with each step. I'm going to let Ethan finish his performance. Then I'm going to show 200 industry leaders exactly who's been signing the checks. Elliot followed her into the hallway. Alicia, if this goes wrong. It won't go wrong because I'm not depending on technology or other people anymore. She pressed the elevator button, her reflection visible in the polished doors. I'm depending on the one thing Ethan never bothered to verify. Which is that the woman he's been dismissing as the maid actually knows how to read a contract. The elevator arrived, empty and waiting. As they descended toward the ballroom, Alicia pulled out her phone and typed a single message to her attorney. Execute Plan B, full ownership disclosure. Tonight. The response came immediately. Documents ready. Press release drafted. Confirmed timing. Alicia looked at Elliot, seeing her own determination reflected in his expression. Are you ready to introduce me correctly this time? What should I say? The truth. That I'm the owner of this building, the majority stakeholder in the acquisition, and the person Ethan Cross has been systematically dismissing while building his empire on my legal authority. The elevator doors opened to reveal the ballroom in full celebration mode. Ethan stood center stage, microphone in hand, addressing the crowd with absolute confidence about his latest business triumph. He had no idea he was about to be corrected. Publicly. Permanently. Ethan's voice carried perfectly across the ballroom, amplified by the sound system that Dorian Price controlled from his booth high above the crowd. The Clearwater acquisition represents more than just growth, Ethan was saying, his tone confident and commanding. It represents vision. The ability to see opportunity where others see obstacles. Alicia stood at the edge of the ballroom, Elliot beside her, watching her husband perform. The crowd was captivated, investors leaning forward, journalists scribbling notes, board members nodding approval. This was Ethan at his best. Charismatic, authoritative, completely in control of his narrative. When we identified Clearwater as an acquisition target 18 months ago, Ethan continued, conventional wisdom said the deal was impossible. Too complex. Too risky. Too expensive. Alicia's grip tightened on the folder containing the real ownership documents. 18 months ago she had been the one researching Clearwater. She had been the one who identified it as undervalued. She had been the one who structured the approach. Ethan had simply signed the papers she put in front of him. But sometimes, Ethan's voice rose slightly, impossible just means you haven't found the right approach yet. Applause rippled through the crowd. Alicia noticed several prominent investors who had initially rejected Cross Industries' overtures now applauding enthusiastically. They believed they were witnessing the triumph of a visionary leader. Elliot's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his expression darkened. Dorian just confirmed he's controlling the transition slides. He wants to review the technical details before your introduction. Let him, Alicia said quietly. Whatever he thinks he knows, it doesn't change the legal reality. But even as she spoke, Alicia felt unease growing in her chest. Too many people were moving pieces on this board. The leak suggested coordination, planning, maybe even payment. Someone wanted to control tonight's narrative, but she still didn't know who or why. Ladies and gentlemen, Ethan's voice drew her attention back to the stage. Before I turn the microphone over to CEO Elliot Carver for some exciting announcements about our future partnerships, I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone special. Alicia's blood went cold. This wasn't part of any script she'd seen. Ethan's eyes found her in the crowd, his smile wide and seemingly genuine. My wife, Alicia, has been incredibly supportive throughout this process. While I've been focused on the big picture strategic work, she's been handling all the detail-oriented tasks that make deals like this possible. The crowd turned to look at her. Cameras swung in her direction. The spotlight operator, following Ethan's gesture, bathed her in bright white light. Alicia's been taking care of all the paperwork, all the organizational elements, all those crucial but unglamorous tasks that someone has to handle while the real negotiating gets done. More applause. But this time Alicia heard something different in it. Not respect, patronizing acknowledgement. The kind of polite recognition given to someone who'd performed necessary but forgettable service. Elliot stepped closer to her. He's trying to get ahead of the story, he whispered. If he acknowledges your role first, he controls how it's framed. Alicia realized with crystalline clarity that Ethan did know. Maybe not everything, but enough. Someone had warned him that tonight would include revelations about her legal involvement. So he was preemptively spinning it as supportive assistance rather than independent ownership. In fact, Ethan continued, his tone warm but subtly condescending, I don't think this deal would have been possible without Alicia's attention to all those important details that keep a complex acquisition on track. The applause was stronger now. Several people near Alicia smiled at her with the kind of indulgent appreciation usually reserved for helpful children or well-trained assistants. So before CEO Carver shares some exciting news about our expanded partnership, I want everyone to give Alicia a round of applause for being the perfect support system. The crowd erupted in enthusiastic clapping. Alicia felt trapped in the spotlight, aware that any reaction she gave would be captured and interpreted. If she smiled and waved, she'd be confirming his narrative. If she looked unhappy, she'd appear ungrateful and petty. Actually, Ethan said, his smile brightening, since Alicia's right here, why don't you come up and take a bow? Let everyone see the woman who keeps Cross Industries running smoothly behind the scenes. The crowd began chanting her name. Not demanding, encouraging. Like parents coaxing a shy child to perform at a family gathering. Alicia realized she was caught in a perfect trap. Ethan had transformed the room's energy from formal business presentation to intimate family celebration. If she refused to join him, she'd appear rude to 200 influential people. If she joined him, she'd be validating his characterization of her as his grateful assistant. Dorian Price appeared at Elliot's shoulder, carrying a tablet. Small technical issue with the presentation deck. Nothing major, but I need to verify some slide transitions before we proceed. Elliot glanced at the tablet, then at Alicia. Everything looks correct to me. Just a precaution, Dorian said smoothly. We want tonight to go perfectly. Alicia. Ethan's voice carried clearly over the crowd noise. Don't be shy. Come up here. The chanting grew louder. More insistent. Camera phones were recording her hesitation, capturing what would look like reluctance to accept well-deserved recognition. Elliot's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it and his expression shifted to alarm. Someone is demanding we shut down the presentation right now. Alicia felt the walls closing in. Someone was orchestrating multiple pressure points simultaneously. Ethan controlling the public narrative, Dorian managing the technical elements, now someone trying to kill the entire event. Ladies and gentlemen, Ethan's voice cut through her calculations. It looks like my dedicated wife is being pulled away by one of those important details that need her personal attention. Let's give her another round of applause for always putting work first. The crowd laughed and clapped, charmed by what appeared to be an authentic moment of marital affection and mutual respect. Alicia realized that in the span of 5 minutes, Ethan had accomplished something remarkable. He'd made her look like the support system for his success story, positioned himself as a generous husband who publicly credited his wife's assistance, and created plausible cover for why she might need to leave the room during the actual business presentation. Alicia took one step toward the aisle. If she followed security, Ethan would own the story. If she walked to the stage, she would detonate it. Ethan smiled into the mic. "Go on, sweetheart. Handle it." Alicia looked up at the spotlight, then at the stage, and made her choice. Alicia walked toward the stage. Each step carried her through a sea of expectant faces, past investors who had dismissed her at countless other events, past journalists who had never bothered to learn her name, past board members who had spoken around her as if she were furniture. The spotlight followed her movement, creating a tunnel of white light that seemed to separate her from everything else in the room. Behind her, she could hear Elliot's sharp intake of breath. Somewhere in the crowd, Dorian Price was probably reaching for backup controls. None of it mattered now. Ethan's smile widened as she approached the stage steps. He extended his hand toward her, the gesture of a gracious husband welcoming his supportive wife to share in his moment of triumph. "There she is," he said into the microphone, his voice warm with apparent affection. "The woman who makes it all possible." Alicia climbed the steps, her heels clicking against the polished wood. The sound echoed through the hushed ballroom as 200 people watched what they expected to be a touching display of marital partnership. She stopped beside Ethan, close enough that the microphone would pick up her voice, close enough that every camera in the room could capture her expression. "Thank you, darling," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. "Though I think there's been a small misunderstanding about exactly what I make possible." Ethan's smile flickered for just a moment. "Alicia. You see," she continued, her tone conversational but cutting through any attempt at interruption, "when Ethan talks about the Clearwater acquisition being his vision, he's absolutely correct. He did envision it. What he didn't do was make it legally possible." A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. This wasn't the gracious acceptance speech they'd expected. "Meridian Holdings LC, Alicia said, pulling a folded document from her purse. "Owner and signatory, Alicia Thorne." The silence in the ballroom was absolute now. Even the ambient noise from the kitchen had stopped. "Thorne is my maiden name," she explained to the crowd as if offering helpful context. "The name I kept on documents while Ethan was signing papers he never bothered to read." She held up the paper so the crowd could see official letterhead and legal stamps. "Ethan has been signing like he owned it." He didn't. Elliot's face had gone pale in the crowd. This wasn't the plan they'd discussed. This was bigger. "Ethan," Alicia said, turning to face her husband directly, "would you like to tell our guests about your management philosophy? Or should I?" Ethan's confident expression was cracking. "Alicia, what are you doing?" "I'm playing a recording." She pulled out her phone and touched the screen. A recording began to play through the sound system. Clear, unmistakable, devastating. Ethan's voice filled the ballroom. "The key to managing Alicia is making her feel useful while keeping her away from anything important. She signs whatever I put in front of her because she thinks she's helping. Women like structure, they like feeling needed. As long as I tell her she's doing important work, she'll handle all the boring legal stuff while I focus on the real business." The recording continued. "She has no idea what any of those documents actually say. I could probably get her to sign over her inheritance if I framed it right. The best part is she's so grateful for any attention that she actually thinks we're partners." Laughter on the recording, not just Ethan's but other voices. Male voices. Voices that some people in the crowd would recognize. The playback stopped. The ballroom was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning system. "That recording was made 6 weeks ago," Alicia said. "By someone in that meeting." The magnitude of the revelation was sinking in throughout the crowd. This wasn't just about a marriage or even about corporate ownership. This was about fraud. Public fraud committed in front of 200 witnesses. "Every contract where Ethan represented himself as the owner," Alicia continued. "Every loan application where he pledged assets that belonged to me. All documented. My counsel delivered the file today." The crowd began to murmur, then talk, then move. Investors were pulling out phones. Journalists were taking notes frantically. Board members were calculating legal exposure. Ethan grabbed for the microphone. "You can't. Alicia didn't raise her voice. I just did. Elliot appeared at the edge of the stage, face tight. We're moving this to a private room. Now. Two security staff stepped beside Ethan. Not rough, just immovable. The crowd parted as he was escorted away, his earlier smile gone like it had never existed. Alicia stayed at the podium for one breath longer. And then she looked out at the room and said calmly, if you need to know who owns what, speak to me. Because the maid was done cleaning up his messes. Now she was collecting the keys. The ballroom emptied faster than Alicia had expected. Not the slow, polite exodus of a concluded business event, but the rapid scatter of people who suddenly realized they'd witnessed something that could destroy careers, trigger lawsuits, and end professional relationships. Within 20 minutes, only a handful remained. Elliot, two members of his legal team, a journalist from Financial Weekly who was furiously typing on her phone, and 3 investors who looked like they were calculating how quickly they could distance themselves from anything connected to Cross Industries. Alicia stood beside the podium, still holding the ownership documents that had just redefined her entire life. The victory she'd imagined felt nothing like this. Mrs. Cross, the Financial Weekly reporter approached, but Alicia cut her off. Miss Thorne, can you comment on whether you plan to pursue legal action against your husband? The question hung in the air like smoke. Alicia realized she hadn't thought beyond tonight's revelation. She'd focused so completely on exposing the truth that she'd never planned for what came next. I'm not pursuing anything, she said carefully. I'm simply clarifying legal ownership. Elliot approached, his expression grim. Alicia, we need to talk. Privately. They moved to a quiet corner of the ballroom while his legal team formed a protective barrier against the remaining journalists. Elliot's voice was low, urgent. Ethan's counsel called. They're claiming you forged the ownership documents. They're saying the holding entities were created without his knowledge and that you've been committing identity theft for years. Alicia felt something cold settle in her stomach. That's ridiculous. I have his signatures on every authorization. Signatures he's now claiming were obtained through deception. His lawyer is arguing that you presented the documents as routine household financial management and that he had no reason to believe he was signing away company assets. The accusation was brilliant in its simplicity. It painted Alicia as the deceptive party while positioning Ethan as the victim of elaborate marital fraud. Elliot, you've seen the documentation. The legal structures are completely valid. I believe you. But belief doesn't matter when this goes public tomorrow morning. Alicia's phone buzzed with a text. Check the website. She opened her browser and searched for Cross Industries. The first result was a company press release, posted 30 minutes ago. Cross Industries regrets to announce that CEO Ethan Cross has been the victim of an elaborate financial fraud perpetrated by an individual with access to company documents. The company is cooperating with authorities to recover assets illegally transferred without proper authorization. Cross Industries is conducting an internal investigation and has notified its lenders and auditors. He's claiming I stole from him, Alicia whispered. Elliot nodded grimly. And from the investors. Anyone who put money into Cross Industries based on Ethan's representations can now sue both of you. Alicia's phone rang. Her attorney. Don't answer it, Elliot said. Not here. Not with reporters listening. But Alicia answered anyway. Graham. Alicia, where are you? Ethan's team filed an emergency motion. The court issued a temporary preservation order. Banks placed a compliance hold on accounts tied to the holding entities until ownership is clarified. The ballroom seemed to tilt around her. Graham, that's impossible. Everything we did was legal. Legal and defensible are different things when you're dealing with this level of public exposure. You can't access any of the assets you just claimed ownership of. All of them. Every account connected to the holding entities. Which means you're locked out until a judge decides whether your ownership claims are valid. Alicia sank into a nearby chair. The magnitude of Ethan's counterattack was becoming clear. While she'd been focused on public humiliation, he'd been preparing for legal warfare. Elliot's legal team approached with phones in hand, their expressions increasingly grave. Elliot, one of them said, Clearwater wants written confirmation by morning. Alicia's email chimed. New message from Cross Industries legal counsel, notice of dispute. Too bad you didn't read the fine print in your own contracts. Every signature you obtained will be challenged as fraud. Every entity you created will be dissolved. Every asset you think you own will revert to its rightful owner. You played the game beautifully, but you forgot who taught you the rules. Legal counsel for Ethan Cross. Alicia stared at the press release. Victim of fraud. Elliot's voice went quiet. By morning, they'll have a judge deciding whether your entities are valid, or whether Ethan was tricked. Alicia swallowed. And you? Elliot didn't meet her eyes. I can't take this into my boardroom. The room felt colder than it had all night. Alicia finally understood what Ethan had done. He hadn't beaten her with power. He tried to beat her with doubt. Because if he could make the world question her credibility, he didn't have to win. He just had to stall. Alicia sat in the empty ballroom for another 20 minutes after Elliot left, staring at the stage where she'd thought she was claiming victory. The catering staff worked around her, clearing glasses and folding chairs, treating her like a piece of forgotten furniture. Her phone had stopped ringing. That was somehow worse than the constant buzzing of earlier. It meant the people who mattered had already made their decisions about which side of this story they believed. When she finally walked to the parking garage, she found Ethan waiting by her car. Not hiding. Not sneaking. Just standing there in his expensive suit, looking like a man who owned the world and was generous enough to share it. Hello, Alicia. She stopped 10 feet away, calculating escape routes and wondering if hotel security monitored this level of the garage. Shouldn't you be meeting with your lawyers? I just finished. Ethan leaned against her car, casual and confident. Interesting conversation. They think we can resolve this without destroying each other. You're very good at this, you know. His tone was almost admiring. The holding entities, the recordings, the theatrical reveal. If I didn't know better, I'd think you actually believed you could win. Alicia's hand tightened around her car keys. I do own those companies, Ethan. You signed the documents. I signed papers my wife put in front of me during dinner. Papers that were presented as routine household financial management. His smile was sharp. Any reasonable person would conclude I was deceived. Any reasonable person would ask why you never read what you were signing. Exactly. Ethan pushed off from the car, taking a step closer. Which story sounds easier to believe? That a successful CEO didn't bother to read legal documents for 6 years? Or that a housewife with no business experience masterminded an elaborate corporate scheme? The words hung between them like poison. Alicia realized that Ethan's confidence wasn't bluster. It was calculation. He'd wargamed this scenario and found his winning strategy. What do you want? To give you a choice. Ethan pulled a folded document from his jacket. A settlement offer. You sign this, acknowledge that the ownership vehicles were created in error, transfer everything back to me, and in exchange you receive $2 million. Wire ready. Alicia stared at the papers. $2 million. For companies worth $60 million. I know it seems unfair, but consider the alternative. Which is? I destroy you. Ethan's voice stayed conversational, almost friendly. By morning, my team files for an emergency injunction and refers this to investigators. Even if nothing sticks, it will freeze everything long enough to break you. He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same scent that had once made her feel safe. If you fight this, I'll make sure Elliot's company suffers too. The Clearwater deal will collapse when investors realize their new partner is embroiled in fraud accusations. Elliot will lose everything because he trusted you. Each threat landed with surgical precision. Ethan wasn't just attacking her, he was threatening everyone who'd helped her build this plan. And your friend Graham Pierce? The lawyer who helped structure your holding entities? He'll face ethics charges for facilitating asset concealment. His firm will drop him to protect their reputation. The audio recording? Alicia asked weakly. Inadmissible. Recorded without consent in a private club. Even if it weren't, people will say you manipulated me into making those statements. Ethan held out a pen. $2 million, Alicia. Enough to start over somewhere else with a new name if you want. All you have to do is admit you made a mistake. Alicia stared at the settlement offer. $2 million would be more money than she'd ever controlled directly. It would buy freedom, distance, a chance to rebuild her life away from this disaster. But it would also validate every dismissive comment Ethan had ever made about her. If I don't sign, then tomorrow becomes very unpleasant for a lot of people. Starting with you. Alicia looked at her husband. This man she'd lived with for 6 years, shared meals with, planned a future with. The man who was now threatening to destroy everyone she cared about unless she surrendered completely. You knew, she said quietly. You knew about the plan before tonight. I suspected. When you started asking me to sign documents during dinner instead of leaving them on my desk, I wondered what had changed. How long have you been preparing? Since someone warned me you were planning something. The revelation staggered her. Someone had tipped him off and he'd used that advance warning to prepare his countermoves. You let me think I was winning. I let you overextend yourself. There's a difference. Alicia closed her eyes, calculating the true scope of her defeat. Every move she'd made had been anticipated. Every ally she'd recruited was now vulnerable. Every legal structure she'd built could be reinterpreted as evidence of deception. This was all a trap. No. Ethan's voice softened, taking on the tone he used when he was explaining something to a child. This was a marriage. I tried to give you everything you needed to be happy. You chose to interpret my generosity as weakness. He held out the pen again. $2 million, Alicia. And everyone else gets to keep their lives intact. Alicia stared at the paper. $2 million to vanish. A lawsuit to survive. Ethan's smile didn't move. Choose. Alicia took the pen. And Ethan relaxed because he thought she was surrendering. She didn't look at the settlement line. She looked at the header, who drafted it and what it quietly admitted. Alicia lowered the tip to the page. And signed. Ethan watched Alicia sign the document, his smile spreading with each stroke of the pen. After 6 years of marriage he knew her handwriting, her hesitations, her defeated postures. This was surrender. Smart choice, he said, reaching for the papers. Alicia held them back. You should read what I signed. I know what you signed. My settlement offer. Actually no. Alicia's voice was steadier now, stronger. I signed the incident acknowledgement your attorney attached. The one that identifies the venue owner and confirms where this negotiation took place. Ethan's smile faltered. What? Alicia held up the document, pointing to a line near the bottom. Owner of premises, Alicia Thorne Holdings. Your lawyers needed to establish jurisdiction for why this meeting could happen here tonight, Alicia continued. So they confirmed that the venue is mine. That you're on my property. That this entire negotiation took place on premises I own and control. The color began draining from Ethan's face. By signing this acknowledgement, I've created a legal record that your own attorneys confirm my ownership of this building. The same building where Cross Industries holds its lease. Ethan lunged for the papers, but Alicia stepped back. The beautiful thing about incident reports, Ethan, is that they're admissions. Your legal team just admitted in writing that I own the venue where you publicly humiliated me 2 hours ago. That's not. The settlement supersedes. The settlement I didn't sign. Alicia smiled for the first time in hours. I only signed the incident acknowledgement. The page that validates everything else I've claimed. Ethan's confident facade was cracking. No court will accept that kind of technical manipulation. They don't have to. Because your own lawyers just confirmed my authority. Alicia pulled out her phone. Graham? It's Alicia. File the notice of default. Cross Industries is now in default under the lease. A cure notice goes out tonight. And Ethan's access badge is revoked immediately. She ended the call and looked at Ethan. You can't enter your own building anymore. Your company has 72 hours to cure the default or face termination. You can't. I can. Because your lawyers just acknowledged I own the building. But Alicia wasn't finished. There's something else you missed in your rush to destroy me. She walked back toward the elevators. When you called Elliot tonight demanding he distance himself from me, threatening to destroy the Clearwater deal if he didn't cooperate? Ethan followed her, his swagger replaced by growing panic. What about it? You did it on a recorded line. The elevator doors opened, revealing Elliot Carver waiting inside. Hello, Ethan. Alicia stepped into the elevator beside Elliot. Someone tipped you off about my plan. You panicked. You came to me with threats. And our counsel recorded the call. Elliot, what the hell? When you threatened to destroy my company unless I betrayed Alicia, Elliot said calmly, you made this very easy for me. I chose to partner with the actual owner instead of the fraud. The elevator doors began to close. "The recording you think was inadmissible?" Alicia called out. "We made it in Elliot's private dining room. With his consent. At a meeting where you tried to recruit him into defrauding me." "And this conversation?" Elliot added. "Our counsel recorded that call too." The doors closed, leaving Ethan alone in the garage. Alicia looked at Elliot. "Do we have what we need?" "We do," he said. "Your ownership. His threats. And his attempt to coerce you, documented." Alicia exhaled once. Then released the statement. Minutes later she stood at the podium, not for a press conference, but for a recorded message her counsel would send to every board member, lender and partner by morning. "My name is Alicia Thorne," she said. "And I'm the owner of this venue." She paused. Looked straight into the cameras. "For 6 years I was called the Maid. Tonight I'm donating an amount equal to the bribe my husband offered, to organizations that help women rebuild after coercion and workplace abuse." Another pause. The weight of actual power settling on her shoulders. "You didn't think I deserved a seat, so I took the table." 3 weeks later, Alicia stood in the same ballroom where her life had changed, but this time she was the one holding court. The setting was different. Smaller gathering, morning light instead of evening glamour, coffee instead of champagne. But the power dynamic had shifted completely. Instead of being introduced as the Maid, she was conducting her first board meeting as chairwoman of Thorne Holdings. "The Clearwater integration is ahead of schedule," Elliot reported from his seat at the conference table. "The new management structure has actually improved operational efficiency." Alicia nodded, making notes on the tablet in front of her. 3 weeks ago she wouldn't have understood half the terms being discussed. Now she was making the decisions that shaped them. What about the cross-industries transition? Completed yesterday. The last of their assets were transferred out of the Riverside building. Their new lease in the suburban office park is significantly more modest. Alicia felt a flicker of something, not satisfaction exactly but completion. Ethan's empire hadn't been destroyed, but it had been right-sized to match his actual authority. And Ethan? Elliot's expression remained neutral. He's working now. Not in leadership. Not with investors. Quiet consulting under a microscope. It wasn't the complete destruction that part of her had wanted, but it was justice. Ethan was rebuilding from the bottom, forced to prove his worth without stolen authority or borrowed credibility. "There is one issue," Elliot continued. "The Times wants to do a follow-up story. 3 weeks after the corporate revelation, they want to know how you've handled the transition to public leadership." Alicia considered this. The initial coverage had been intense. Some outlets calling her a corporate mastermind, others painting her as a scorned wife who'd gotten lucky. The truth, as usual, was more complex than either narrative. What kind of story? Profile piece. From invisible to influential, the new face of corporate accountability. They want to interview women who followed your lead, started asserting ownership of their contributions. This was the part Alicia hadn't expected. In the weeks following her revelation, she'd been contacted by dozens of women, wives of business partners who'd discovered their signatures on documents they'd never understood, employees whose ideas had been presented by supervisors as original work, investors whose contributions had been minimized by male colleagues. The reporter mentioned 17 different cases where women have used your approach to reclaim credit for their work. 3 have resulted in similar ownership revelations. Alicia absorbed this information carefully. She'd wanted to expose her own situation, but she hadn't realized it would inspire a broader movement. "There's something else," Elliot said, his tone shifting slightly. "Ethan requested a meeting." The words hung in the air between them. In 3 weeks, this was the first direct contact her ex-husband had attempted. "What does he want?" He didn't say. 10 minutes. Your terms. Your counsel nearby if you want." Alicia looked around the ballroom, the scene of her greatest humiliation and her most complete victory. The space felt different now. Smaller, somehow less intimidating. It was just a room where people gathered to make decisions. "Schedule it," she said finally. "Here. Tomorrow at 10. The next morning, Alicia arrived early and sat at the same table where Elliot had shown her the ownership documents that had started everything. She wore a simple black dress. Professional but not aggressive, confident but not performative. When Ethan walked in, she almost didn't recognize him. The swagger was gone. The dismissive smile had been replaced by something that looked almost like humility. He'd lost weight, and there were lines around his eyes that suggested sleepless nights. "Hello, Alicia." "Ethan." He sat across from her, the same position they'd been in during countless dinner conversations where she'd placed documents in front of him to sign. "I wanted to thank you," he said. The words were so unexpected that Alicia blinked. "Thank me? For not destroying me completely. You could have. You had the evidence, the media attention, the public sympathy." Alicia studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. She found none. "I didn't do this to destroy you, Ethan. I did it to save myself." "I know. That's what makes it real." They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the ghosts of everything they'd built and destroyed together. "I've been going to therapy," Ethan said finally. "Trying to understand how I became someone who could dismiss another person so completely." "And what have you learned?" "That I was scared. Of being ordinary. So I made myself feel important by making you feel small." He looked directly at her. "I'm sorry." The apology hung between them, genuine and insufficient at the same time. "I accept your apology," Alicia said carefully. "But I need you to understand something. This conversation isn't about forgiveness. It's about acknowledgement." Ethan nodded slowly. "You were never the maid, were you? Even when I called you that. You were always the person who actually understood how everything worked." "Yes." When Ethan left, Alicia remained in the ballroom for another hour, processing the conversation and what it meant. His growth didn't erase the years of dismissal and control. What mattered was that she changed too. She hadn't just won. She changed. And that change was the part nobody could take back. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elliot. "Times interview confirmed for next week. They want your advice for women in similar situations." Alicia typed back, "Tell them I have one piece of advice. Read every document before you sign it. Question every narrative that makes you invisible. And remember, you didn't think I deserved a seat, so I took the table." She stood up, collected her belongings, and walked toward the exit. As she reached the door, she turned back for one last look at the ballroom. 3 weeks ago, she'd stood in this room while her husband introduced her as the maid. Tonight, she would go home to her own house, the one she'd bought with her own money from her own accounts, and review proposals for expanding her companies into new markets. The transformation was complete, but the work was just beginning. Because she'd learned that owning your power was only the first step. Using it to help others find theirs, that was the real job. What did this story teach you about recognizing your own worth and refusing to accept dismissive treatment? Have you ever found yourself signing papers or accepting narratives that made your contributions invisible? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world, and how you see your own power within it.